I have always been fascinated by space all my life. I took courses in astronomy, and at one point in time, I was even enrolled in an astrophysics program in university. As the release of this game called Starfield approached, my anticipation grew. For the first time in my life, I wrote a blog post and made a YouTube video about a video game. Before you watch this video, I want to be upfront and tell you that I have played Starfield for about 10 hours, and I do not intend to play any more of it. I do not like Starfield. It has been a disappointing 10-hour ordeal with short moments of bliss. Now, if you care to find out why I feel this way, please keep watching. Let's get to the good parts first. But before that, let me tell you, I know I will never get to go to the moon. I can say that one can dream and be hopeful that space travel will someday become so popular and affordable that one day it might even be possible for regular folks like me to travel to the moon. But I know that's not going to happen, at least not in my lifetime. At least I don't think so. So with that in mind, let me tell you, I was on the moon in Starfield, jumping around, and it was glorious. This is probably the closest thing to jumping on the moon that I will ever get to experience. And it was amazing. In fact, jumping around in any low gravity planet in Starfield is pretty amazing. And I think different planets have different gravity in Starfield, and your movement is affected by that fact, which I think is a neat little detail. And speaking of details, visually there is an astonishing amount of detail, from coffee mugs to notepads to tiles on the floor, but not just visually. The immersive in-game city audio, filled with bustling sounds of the city of neon, creates this sensation that this virtual city is truly alive. Although if we are comparing the cyberpunk style city visuals, the Ascent really takes the cake, and it does it much better. Now, another thing that I liked was the story about how different factions in Starfield came about. I think that was interesting. But once I got going, I did not really care about which faction I was working for or against. It was just another side mission that led me to shooting someone or retrieving something. Now, that's about where the good parts end for me personally. All the game assets are very detailed. The color palette feels a bit unappealing to me in some areas. There is this general hazy look, which after a few hours into the game, I realized that it's something that you can completely turn off in the display settings. The game itself is both beautiful and not so beautiful at the same time. There is so much detail in some areas, like cities and even single rooms. Yet at other occasions, it and certain aspects of the game seem like it's from a different generation. It's from an older generation, not from a current generation. So yeah, I think the game looks both beautiful and not so great at the same time. It's hard to describe unless you actually play the game. When it comes to gameplay, the gunfight, the movement, they're all better than Fallout 4. But still, nothing groundbreaking. It still feels like a Bethesda game. For me, what always comes to mind is Mass Effect Andromeda. With all its flaws, it still had superb gameplay mechanics, from the way weapons fired to movement while in combat. But I understand that no one really plays Bethesda games for its gameplay. It's good enough, it's satisfying, it's just not great, but it's okay. The game begins with your character touching some artifact that gives you a vision, and then you are on this quest to understand its mysteries and collect more of the parts of this artifact. Sounds very much like Mass Effect. The difference is, with Mass Effect, I was intrigued and wanted to find more about the artifact while playing. There was also a sense of importance, a sense of urgency. I felt that my character was part of something bigger. In Starfield, I felt none of that. The Constellation Group did very little to convince me as a player that I should even care about this artifact and what these visions could mean. Now, when it comes to side missions, I just want to give you a disclaimer. I have only played this game for about 10 hours, and it could very well be that these side missions that I have played are in fact not as interesting as other side missions are. It is well known in the gaming community that side missions are one of the main attractions in almost every Bethesda game. I have heard many people say that there are some very interesting side quests in Starfield. So, taking that into account, it is possible that I might have, just by sheer luck, come across the less interesting ones. Now, to give you an example, here are a few things that I did in side missions. I mined some resources, I applied for jobs, took tests to qualify for those jobs, took a museum tour talking about the history of how different factions came into being, convinced an idiot to take a loan because his business was sinking because he opened a mining operation on a water planet, handed out flyers to local businesses, brought some coffee to my corporate bosses, picked up sensors around trees that looked like little eggs around the city to help a researcher. Do any of these sound interesting to you? If I wanted a job as an intern, I would go get a job as an intern in real life. Why would I spend my money and time to do these things in a video game? Some people enjoy doing these things in a video game. I do not. I just don't. There were other combat missions that I did, but they did little to make up for the drudgery of the missions that I mentioned. The other thing that I was quite annoyed by is the endless sequence of loading screens. They're not long, especially on the Series X. I don't know about the Series S. And I think on the PC too, if you have a reasonably modern computer, I don't think the loading sequences are going to be that long. But still, it was a bit annoying. It takes you away from the flow of the game. And the game itself is generally quite slow. Another thing is, for a space game, space travel is pointless, because there is no real space travel. You simply select a planet and fast travel to the orbit of the planet, and then you fast travel to the locations on the planet. And of the few planets that I visited, there are mostly just only 2 or 3 locations that you can actually travel to. Apparently this is the case of every other planet that people have been to. Another thing is there's no real exploration in the game. There's no sense of adventure like in Skyrim, which is something that I recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I started playing because everyone kept saying Starfield is Skyrim in space, and I'd never played Skyrim because I kept hearing people say, oh, I've spent X hundred hours in the game, and I didn't have the time or patience to spend that much time in a video game. But I decided to give it a try, and Skyrim is amazing. I like that you could just walk from one location to the other, notice a cave or some creature or some landmark, and go there and check it out, and I'd find something. There's none of that in Starfield. A lot of traveling in Starfield is just selecting a target and teleporting there. Once I tried landing somewhere else on the planet, close to my target, but not exactly at the target, and it took a very long time of just walking in that direction, and it just felt like that target location was not getting any closer. So I gave up and then selected a target location and just traveled there. From what I'm hearing people say, walking from one location to another is not even really possible because there are either physical boundaries or invisible boundaries. And I'm not saying that I was expecting a No Man's Sky type of space exploration, but No Man's Sky does all that. They're saying that Starfield has about 1,000 planets, I think. But if each of those planets only have 2 or 3 locations that you can actually go to that has any kind of meaning to it, then it doesn't make sense to have all these planets. I would have preferred, say, 10 or 15 or 20 planets. And each of those planets have, say, 40 or 50 other different locations that I can travel to. Having all these different planets seem pointless to me. A lot of people are saying that the game starts to get better much later, but I cannot get myself to spend any more time on this. And a lot of people in my age group, they don't have time. This is the first time I'm talking about a game and writing a blog about a game. One, because it's about space, and secondly, there was so much hype surrounding this game that I just couldn't help but at least give it a try. And from what I've read, there are about 6 million players that have actually played the game. That's a staggering number, especially it's been out for 2-3 days now, and the pre-release, I think, a week. So I'm not saying that this is not a great game. This is not a game for someone like me. So it was around at 3 a.m. and 10 hours into the game that I decided that I could, at that very moment, do anything at all and still have a better time than playing Starfield. So I decided to stop, and I don't think that I'm going to spend any more time playing this game.